to the Living Farms podcast, the place where we discuss biodynamic practices worldwide for you, your farm, and the planet. Welcome to the Living Farms podcast, and thanks for tuning in again. Maybe a small note on this episode. The two of the people joining this podcast are living in very different regions of the world, and their internet connections is sometimes not the best. So also the audio quality might differ during the episode. However, we found it extremely important to integrate also the perspectives and ideas of people living in regions where the internet connection is not the best. So therefore, we hope that you are still able to hear their thoughts and ideas respectively. And thank you for tuning in. So welcome to the Living Farms podcast. I'm really excited today because we have the first episode with three people on the line. We have Manfred and Alan, and we are going to talk about biodynamics and agroforestry because the both of them have very interesting agroforestry projects. So welcome the two of you.
Thank you, Len.
Thank you.
And maybe we dive directly into the topic. Alan, how did you came across biodynamics, and what was your path leading to this specific type of agriculture?
Oh yeah, great. When I came to Pennsylvania, which is where our agroforestry farmstead is now, recently, but when I first came here, I found an organization called the Horn Farm Center, which taught permaculture and regenerative agriculture. In fact, they even have programs like the Woodland Steward Program and things like this. There's actually a lot of that in Pennsylvania. And so I was very immersed in it. I'd always loved gardening, but this was something kind of completely new. And of course, moving from Louisiana as kind of a tropical situation to Pennsylvania, it was an opportunity to learn lots of new plants. So I met lots of people, learned a lot through those programs, including one called Forest Garden Design with Dave Jackie. And then we actually we moved next door to a Waldorf school. And this was our first exposure to anything Steiner, anything that has, resulted from Steiner, I should say. And we eventually had one of our children and sort of an early childhood class. The next thing you know, my wife is teaching there part-time. The next thing you know, she's getting her teacher certification and becoming an early childhood teacher and immersing herself in anthroposophy. And so she brought anthroposophy into the home as well. And so from there, and of course our children bring it too, because they're just like, soaking all of that good pedagogy up. And then, one day I'm always gardening and doing the permaculture and the regenerative practices in our backyard and as a volunteer other places. And one day my wife brought home the brochure for the Pfeiffer Center year-long training and said, would you want to do this? And I just lit up. I was like, can I, do we have the means, for me to go and do these things? And we made it happen. And so I studied, for the sort of part-time, it was like a weekend, per month, so that you're able to kind of get the entire year rhythm, throughout, and learn biodynamic practices and prep making, and really study the agriculture course or the agriculture lectures. So that is how I got to biodynamics, and then just, I would say really, solidifying that, just practicing it a lot in Florida, where we lived for the past 2 years, and at our new farmstead.
Great. Thank you, Alan. And Manfred, you're also quite familiar with anthroposophy and biodynamics, I would say. We have met several occasions at the agriculture conference also this last year, and maybe you can give us an insight how you came to biodynamics and anthroposophy as well.
Yeah, well, I made the Waldorf school from the beginning to the end in São Paulo and in Germany. And after I went working on several farms just to experience agriculture and decide, is it my work for my life? And I found biodynamics through a studying group that exists in São Paulo. I had to go there. More old people were studying, and then I went studying myself, agronomist. And after the study, I started to work with a small scale agrar reform farmers. They received the land and were just beginning. They have had to face a very hard situation with low inputs. And I start doing intuitive a land organism, farming organism. And later, one of these old biodynamics men came to me and said, there is a course of 1 year you can learn biodynamics at Tottenfelder Hof by Frankfurt. And I did it. I lent the money, I hadn't it. They went for a year there, and after I had the feeling you have to practice more. So I went to Reinhard first in the Kölner Bucht in Germany, and afterward to Peter Blaser in Switzerland. And then I had the unusual experience of being housekeeper of Goetheanum for a year. I tried to make some money before returning to Brazil. And when I came to Brazil, I found a situation of biodynamics that was ugly. Nothing works fine and well. They made the preparations okay, but the cows weren't happy. Either it was too wet and rainy, and cows were cows. The cattle was sad, or it was too dry, and you can have only goats and no cows. And I began to understand that our climatic tropical situation was not that easy for a method that came out of temperate climate, where you have 4 regular seasons, and you have 600 millimeters rainfall in Frankfurt, and you have economical, stable conditions, and you have wonderful people who works out of 1,000 years experience of farming. If you take the beginning of the Dreifelderwirtschaft in the Middle Ages, you have lots of practical experience how to manage, for instance, cow manure. This is ancient experience, and we don't have it in Brazil. So I found a very chaotic situation and found very soon Ernst Götz worked with agroforestry. He calls agrofloresta because it is really differentiated form of agroforestry work. I hope everybody knows Ernst Götz's work. And there I found for the first time in tropics landwirtschaftlicher Organismus. The first time.
So the farm
not
organism.
With cows, not with cows, but with trees. You cannot call it biodynamics. But when I went with Wolfgang Schaumann there in Bahia and showed him the agroforestry, he said, this is a metamorphosis of our European cow, Dreifelderwirtschaft, green manuring organism. Clay, grass, Gemenge, and so on, you do all these techniques, which are wonderful. And he wrote an article in Lebendige Erde very soon. This was the year of 88. And I was lightened up inside because I received from destiny a question. Is it enough to put some trees in the landscape and say, I have an organism? Or what will be necessary to catch up with biodynamics, which are so wonderful in the in temperate climate biomes, so wonderful. What has to be done to catch up and to have something equal in really tropical situations? This was the main question of my life.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, Manfred. And I saw that Alan was knocking several times when you mentioned the difficulties of tropical agriculture and combining it with agroforestry and trees. So what are your experiences, Alan?
Well, I just wanted to say most of my nodding was just soaking up everything that Manfred has to say. It's like we started this conversation as the invitation for the podcast was sort of an email chain, and I'm just so excited to hear all of the things that he's been going through. But what was your question for me?
Like, what was your experience? Why did you integrate agroforestry with biodynamics, and how did it go so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was the background that I kind of seen agroforestry through the Horn Farm Center and its benefits. And then some of it was just happenstance, is that the property that we found that friends of ours were selling, which, by the way, we would never have gotten if it weren't for the Waldorf school. So really beautiful, amazing things happen, for a reason. Our friends whose child was with our child graduating from the Waldorf school decided to downsize from this farm and sold it to us and made it possible for us to buy this. So the happenstance, just the circumstance, said, let's get biodynamics into this forest that's already here. So about 10 of our acres are forested, and or maybe even a little more. But I think just the excitement of the uncharted territory, kind of like what Manfred was talking about, is like that. I'm excited about perennial agriculture in general, because I think that, annual agriculture in many ways, or in a contemporary sense, has only gotten worse since, basically the reduction of science of chemical agriculture and the industries behind that are now supporting or behind agriculture. And perennial agriculture is an opportunity for us to have a bounty, plenty of food, without tilling the earth and without applying, poisons and whatnot. But I think that, part of the reason for poisons is just the monoculture and the vast amounts. So we lost Manfred. I think perennial agriculture has a lot of opportunities because of its low disturbance level and its abundance. And of course, if I'm going to do agroforestry, I'm going to apply biodynamics. I can't imagine anyone who has gone through and worked in biodynamics could not integrate those deeply imbued experiences and hopefully wisdom into everything that they do. Really everything, not even just farming.
So we lost Manfred for a short second, but now he's back, which is great.
Internet dropped. I'm sorry.
No worries. We have you back, and that's what it counts. So Manfred, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you approached the integration of Ernst Götsch and agroforestry with biodynamics.
Ernst Götsch is a Swiss researcher who went to the tropics with a broad knowledge about pasture plants, for cows and cattle. This was his technical background. And then he found this wonderful tropical woods, so biodiverse and so full of wisdom, which show the woods a great portion of autodynamics. Things work and work well for centuries and thousands of years out of their own wisdom. You don't need you don't need philosophy if you know a tropical wood. I will say it's a bit too much, but there is so much wisdom inside such a wood, and one living being helping the other, that suddenly you understand biodiversity not as a cold mathematical number, but it is the utmost disposal of nature to include and include and include and include, and one more and more and more and more, like if such a wood would be a family of some 1,000 different species. And inside is harmony. There is no struggle for survivance. So Ernst Götz found this woods and said, I cannot go on making agriculture in the same way I did before. And he started looking, and he found in native people and relatives of native people mixtures of Negro, white European, and native people. He found in this very simple men and women which lived in a place without electricity, without machines, but they produce food, a lot of food. He found several agroforestry approaches, and then he started doing it himself. He was young, and he started researching, always looking to his master. The master was the forest. I don't have to tell you the numbers, only fish species you have in the Amazonian basin, 2,000 species, different species. So he learned always there and applied it in his system. When I found it myself, I can say there opened a new gate to me, and I tried all my life to learn how to do it. But in the last 10 years, I was also trying to simplify it, the agroforestry, and this knowledge of Ernst Götz, just to make it feasible for every farmer to do it. Because what he does is very complex. Everybody admires, but not everybody can do it, is able to do it. And in the last 25 years, I tried to bring anthroposophical and Gayesian point of views into my own agroforestry. And I found that even in the landwirtschaftlicher course, there are so many elements we read, but as the focus is on a Savannian type of agriculture, like we do with corn not with wheat and machines and cows, it is Savannian and respectful Savannian. I love it. As we have the focus on this, we don't give a special focus on what Steiner said about trees. But if you turn the point of view and look to the lectures out of an experience in agroforestry, you find that Steiner gave a lot of hints for those who want to try it with trees and not with cows. That's my personal, respectful opinion. So, for instance, he says that if you take some organic material and put it hills like a small hill above the earth, it fills with etherical forces, with vitality. And then he says, why does he says it? At the same breath, he says, but in the trunk and in the branches of the tree, you have more vitality even than in the hill. He is encouraging us to try an agriculture with trees. That's how I read it. After I studied the agricultural course for 40 years, and reading it today, I find new aspects. 20, 30 years ago, I didn't saw them in the text. So, I think I have said enough.
Thank you so much. Alan, and what was for you the steps that you managed to integrate biodynamics into your farm field, or what does resonate with you when Manfred is talking about those different aspects in the agriculture course?
Oh yeah. I wanted to say that I'm certainly not bragging, but like I did notice, the hints in the agriculture course because I was so tree and forest centered when I entered the agriculture force. I was never a traditional, annual farmer or, like you said, Sylvanian. But you're right. There's just such beauty there. The earth risen up. I just have to say that, right? Like that's like how he described the tree. At least in the English translation, is the earth risen up to kind of meet the astrality. And it's just like such a beautiful thing. I knew, so some of the opportunities in a forest are not, just trees, but also non-timber forest products. So I'm integrating all those, or many of those, I should say. There's countless, right? Just like the biodiversity Manfred was describing, but mushrooms. So I'm growing gourmet, culinary, edible mushrooms, including oysters, shiitake, chestnut, and many, North American mushrooms. And so that is kind of also a product. You're selecting, tree stock to plant the mushroom spawn in. And then also I'm growing medicinals on the forest floor that don't grow other places. And these things have such high value because all we know of farming is giant field, miles and miles of the same thing. Well, cohosh and ginseng and these other medicinal plants. And I'm sure you know of many, Manfred, very special plants in South America that, they don't grow in that environment. They say, we are special and we need to be on the forest floor and we need that biodiversity around us. Like they won't even grow. And consequently, it's a very high value crop for the roots, leaves, stems, or flowers of these medicinal plants. So that's part of it too. And then I think another big opportunity is, of course, fruit or nut crops. And of course we did some orcharding at the Pfeiffer Center class. But the way I started to integrate things, and, I really had to have some pause because everything I've been taught has said that you must observe 10 times, before doing anything, or more. But I had a mentor, Jennifer Green, who's a water researcher in Maine, who was part of the Pfeiffer Center class, and that's how I met her. But she was like rooting me on all the time. Oh, you're getting a farm. Here's what you need to do, and she's like, start applying 500 immediately. And honestly, she's like, as much as you can. And it was amazing. So I'm kind of like doing my observation and my meditative work there in this new place that I've never been, but a familiar, bioregion, recognizing each plant, and really applying 500 throughout the land, fields, forests, riparian around waterways, which there's a lot of water here. And every time I did that, honestly, every time I had an amazing natural experience, like a baby deer coming up to me while I'm stirring 500, like things that would not happen otherwise. Birds, butterflies, like any sort of like, or even just noticing like, not to get too out there with this, but even just noticing something that I would not have otherwise noticed. So I feel in doing this, and perhaps this was her intention in instructing me this way, but maybe not. Just like my senses were heightened and focused on the right things, and I was really getting communication from the land, and that I'm so grateful that I was able to do that basis for the land. And obviously with, one of the reasons we don't do something, we observe before we do something, is because often we're talking about a giant machine, right? Like a backhoe or a tractor, right? Yeah. Don't like just go, and you have to know what it is that you're going to implement before you do it. But with, the biodynamic preparations, which as we know are so minute, that they're not, that they're more of an instruction. They're more of a sort of an impulse than an actual chemical change or whatever. There's no harm in doing it. And as I found, only benefit. So that was one way that I started to implement things. And then just trying to talk to people like Manfred. I spoke to a biodynamic farmer that was doing mushrooms, and I asked him, how do you apply biodynamics to the growing of mushrooms? And his response was, well, I never thought of that. And I was like, no. So then I started like prompting him with questions. I was like, do we inoculate a log on a root day? Do we pick the mushroom on a fruit day? Like what are they in relation to these indications given to us in the agriculture lecture, and other, research that other biodynamic people have done, but mostly on annual agriculture. So it's like doing a couple of things, trying to build this intuition and this sensitivity for the land, and just asking lots of questions of other people that they've never thought of before.
Great. And may I ask a very technical question? Because I know that this is a challenge for some of the agroforestry farmers with the preparations. How do you spray them? What are your steps? Because you have those big trees in between, then you have maybe areas where it's a little bit more bushy, so to say. So how do you technically spray the preparations in an agroforestry system?
Well, I have like a backpack sprayer that, has never had any chemicals in it. So I will use that. I did that for like the Pfeiffer field spray, and some other preparations, but something more delicate, like the Three Kings preparation or whatnot. I would use like some sort of, that's just walking a perimeter, so it's not quite as intense. But I would just choose areas, and I have like brushes, like just like you would maybe walk a small garden or a field, and just choose areas. I'm not like mixing, everything is mixed by hand for me. And really it's just me at the moment. I'm trying to invite more people onto the farm and get people into this, including some existing biodynamic practitioners in the area. But if I had more people, I'm sure we could cover more ground. But again, that's part of that sensitivity, is like, what area am I going to do today? And how, and what particular thing am I going to apply? But very manual is the answer. Very manual.
Thank you. And Manfred, I know from discussions we had before that you have a different approach with the preparations, and maybe you feel like sharing a little bit on your insights, how you adapted the preparation idea to your agroforestry system.
Well, our project, our art project, the name is Agriculture Regenerative Tropical. We don't use the name Biodynamics out of profound respect and out of our real situation. We are an experimental project. So we are open to succeed, and we are open not to succeed with the things we are doing. And as truly experimental, we decided to make a 100% of metamorphosis of biodynamics. And every part of biodynamics, we try to find a tropical expression for it. For instance, the Kleegrasgemenge, this low clover grasses you use to make a cow pasture, they transformed into, for instance, corn, maize, and kajanus, guandu. It is called pigeon pea mixture, because both express this will of plants to turn into trees, which Steiner's mentions as a will that exists even in herbal plants. So we made also a metamorphosis of the preparations out of their final effect, which science in Europe detected. And so preparations were found to be, for instance, the compost preparations, the 6. They were found to be conducting the process of rotting, do you say, of the compost mass in a very harmonic way. So it turns to be a better compost at the end of the process. On the other hand, the Spritzpräparate, they attend this double effect of strengthening the plant from the root region and lifting the plant out of peripheric sun and atmosphere region. Like if the plant would be a tent you can lift up with bindfaden.
Yeah, with strings.
Something like this.
Yeah.
So this double effect metamorphosis to the tropics led us to the strengthening of the rock memory of the soil on one side through rock meals applied to soil, because tropical soils have very low quality mineralogy. On the other hand, you can strengthen the photosynthesis process with cutting the excess of wind, with wind breaking hedges. You have a strengthening action on yields, on crops, on plants, if they are not so exposed to this strong tropical winds. So this was 1/3 of what we did. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you have the necessity of every plant, if it goes through evolution and turns to be more and more tropical, the necessity to be surrounded by other species is very objective, perceptible, but official science treats it only numerical. They speak about numbers. Biodiversity are only numbers, but the quality of biodiversity is that every plant doesn't want to have as neighbor his brother or his sister. he wants to have as neighbors other species. And this is very exciting to discover this. And so we started to learn about ancient indigenous polycultures and to develop and research new combinations. I will cite two of these combinations so it is not so abstract. If you grow aubergine, how do you say in
Eggplant.
English?
Eggplant, yeah. Aubergine.
Eggplant under the green tent of papaya, you have better papayas and better eggplants. They both together, they are a team. NBA, Michael Jordan and the other one, I don't know. Okay? On the other hand, slow plants, herbal plants. If you grow rote beete,
Beetroot?
I'm sorry.
That's
what?
beetroot.
Beetroot. And together with lauch.
That's porridge. No, that's
Porridge.
probably. Yeah, sorry. That's green leaf probably or something like that. It's a green. It's a vegetable, which
yes,
is.
But it's a Liliaceae of the family of Liliaceae. If you grow rote beete,
beetroot.
beetroot with this lauch together, they both integrate so marvelous that they don't feel any loss, but they are healthy and they are happy. Because if you look to plants and ask inside yourself if they are happy in the situation they are growing, over the years you get some answers out of your Goethean point of view of observation, if they are happy or not. And this is a combination, we did it several times. They are especially happy together. And there are many, many others which were not usual and we are discovering now anew. So in our courses, people can find new inspiration for their own farming. And just to say, we are very focused on fruits and on vegetables. So we don't are planting, for instance, cacao or coffee. We are not planting cereals, but we are planting tropical root plants. And for instance, manioc is a good fellow to any other plants. He is the universal good fellow, we call him, out of field observation. And now we are publishing piece by our discoveries. You even have a new kind of event on our small farm. Everybody knows that this small red beetle with black points, you call it Maikäfer.
Yeah, those little bugs often present in the field.
And he loves to eat this other insect that sucks the plant. We call it all biological control in Brazil. What we didn't heard anywhere, and what we didn't knew that would be possible, that between herbs there could be spontaneous biological control too. We haven't published it yet, but there is a very complicated herb, weed, it's better to say, we call Chiririca. It is of the family of the, it's not Poaceae, it's, I don't remember. But there came a spontaneous legume, tropical legume, and covered the area where it exists, like a green manure, and had some allelopathic effect. Hey, you are too much here. I will put you on your place. And this happened without one effort of us.
That's
so your original questions, how do we deal with preparations? We are doing everything we can to improve wisdom and autodynamics inside our systems, who have better, and now comes the main effect of biodynamical preparations in my point of view, which is better quality of food. And this I say very respectful. I find it so good that preparations are being used to plant carrots, for instance, and then they have better contents of vitamin A and C, and less contents of the parts of the vitamin. So plant can complete its physiological cycle and can serve animals and human beings with better quality. Well, we are achieving the same effect with our treatment, which is a metamorphosis of preparations. And since we are talking about an agriculture, I call it, today I love to say that we have an anthroposophical inspired agriculture, because this expression includes us. If people only talk about biodynamics, we are out of this language. It's only a question of words. So there is something we have to acknowledge about Steiner's greatest artistical work, which is the first Goetheanum. And there he gave the task to sustain the both couples to certain columns, we say. And one of the circle of columns, he gave the task to the 7 planets. And in his masterpiece, one of his masterpieces of occult science, Steiner explains that the word comes out of the planetary spheres. They are creative of this world. The 4 incarnations of the earth, I will not go longer with it. So we couldn't take it serious enough that Steiner speaks and acts in favor of planetary trees. We had the luck to have an observer and researcher in tropical planetary trees called Nico Brodnic. He's a Polish guy raised in Germany and Peru, and he lived all his life, his adult life, in Brazil. And he made it to his hobby, or to his main task. And he works with special children and special young youth. And he made it to his life task to observe quite good what are the planetary expressions in tropical trees. And so we found him, and he gave courses, and we learned with him and started ourselves to observe it. And for instance, we found that palm trees are a very special expression of the planet Sun. When I told this to Wolfgang Schad, and I visited him 2 times in his house in the last 7 years. He turned to be quiet for 5 minutes in silence, reflecting. And then he said, "Manfred, you are right. This is great. I'm only astonished why I myself didn't found the same." And this was a strong experience for art method, to hear such a graduated Gathian researcher say, yes, what you are doing in planetary trees in the tropics, it makes sense. Go on doing it. So now we are trying to find some financial means to study better the quality of our food, because if it is comparable to this beautiful quality of biodynamical food, we should sit together and talk about it for a week, I think. What are we doing in the tropics? And what does it mean for the future in a world that is heating up? That means tropics will be everywhere. And I have talked too much already.
No, I mean, it's super interesting. I love your experience and your thoughts on this. And what really resonates with me is one aspect the two of you have maybe talked about at different points now, that doing agroforestry is quite a local kind of agriculture, because you really need to adapt it to your local situation. And I think that's, for me, from what I hear, has been done fantastically by the both of you. And on the other hand, at least what I heard was that it requires a different kind of thinking about agriculture. And from the experience I have made with people doing agroforestry, it's kind of this tree and wood people, and then there are the crop people, so to say. And I really love with agroforestry that it's a combination of both. And I would love to hear from you, maybe, Alan, what your experience is. What can be learned from the two different parts, let's say trees and crops? What can be learned from the combination of the two of the systems?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I want to get really contentious and disagree with Manfred and say that he did not talk too much. Talk as much as you want, Manfred. I love it. I love every second of it. What can be learned? I mean, it really is what Manfred said, is that that biodiversity, and I think that is the huge separation. I mean, rarely do you see, I think, a biodynamic farm or biodynamic garden that is monoculture. You know, so we have the understanding of that these plants work together. But again, that, you know, just as Manfred said, the wisdom of the forest is that these things are all already together. And they have grown that way. And they have grown that way, because I think of the spiritual design of everything, but I think also because of succession, in annual agriculture, we are creating early succession over and over again, right? Every field wants to become a forest. That wisdom is already there. The balance, I think, is what you also have to notice about it, that is also already there. And if it's not there, well, that balance has to come. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities with biodynamics. And that's what Steiner seems to repeat, and Pfeiffer and Maria Thun and all of these people, is that if something is, if you get this sense that something is wrong, that something is, there's a weed that's taking over, or an insect infestation, well, that's a balance issue. And forests, I think, are naturally balanced. And who knows why, but I feel like I'm kind of Like, could you repeat the question again so I can kind of get back on?
No, but I think you mentioned it already. I mean, for me, it would be the question, like, what can be learned out of this combination of, let's say, trees and crops, and also maybe mentally for the different people. Like, what, I mean, I would say like a arable crop agriculture teaches you some life lessons, while working with trees teaches you maybe another lessons or several lessons. And I think the combination of the two is a bunch of experience. So
yeah, and the truth is I don't have a ton of experience with arable crops, you know, so maybe that would be, maybe Manfred could lend something to that. I mean, you know, on a much smaller scale I do, but not large crops.
Mm-hmm. So Manfred, what would you say to this? Like, what are the main lessons that can be learned for us as humans, combining the two different kind of systems with trees and arable crops?
Yeah. I worked lots of years with arable crops in Brazil and in Germany and in Switzerland. And the simple answer to this question could maybe be the following. You can only have arable crops if there is a climatic protection to it. If you live in Central Europe and you have always this tissue of clouds covering your landscape, during winter, during spring, and even during autumn. And clouds protect you from the sun. And if you have only a few strong rainfall, but normally is falling a very soft rain on your beautiful landscape. Imagine Great Britain, where they make big feasts the day the sun comes out of the clouds. This national is even more important than the Queen, when the sun comes out in Great Britain, you know? So Great Britain is this cloudy landscape atmosphere is completely protected. And now compare it with the spot at the Sahel zone, the transition from Sahara to dry savanna in Africa, the Sahel zone. There is complete unprotection, no protection. So you can only talk about it makes sense to use the plow if you have this atmospheric protection of the clouds and of the 4 seasons. If you don't have them and you go to the tropics, you have to find a way to protect your soil with new kind of, let us call trees our fellows. Trees and shrubs, they are our fellows. They are on our side trying to combine protection into life promotion into crops. So I would like to say we have big tasks in the next years to find ways to save our crops. Because you had already in Central Europe the loss of crops out of drought, and you are losing even woods out of drought. And our focus is only on the soil, and this is a small mistake. Our focus should be on plant physiology. How does plant deal with water? What happens with water inside plant? And we will discover that water inside plant is the big mother, is the big supporter of photosynthesis. You cannot have photosynthesis if stomata don't open, and they don't open if there is not transpiration. So the question of trees and shrubs inside fields, not only surrounding them like we have it so beautiful, for instance, at Dottenfelder Hof, they have so beautiful hedges there. Not to say all Great Britain works with beautiful hedges. This is a very British way of constructing and planning, designing landscape. Okay. Now these hedges, 100, 200 meters away from another, they have to come close and turn into fellows. This is a metamorphosis. So we are doing hedges every 18 meters on our gardens. So tree is our fellow, and now I have them protecting the crops, and they provide us with branches. And this very green wood of the branches, it is flexible, it is alive, and Steiner he gave emphasis, Steiner, in the agriculture course to say, this is a very living substance. And now you cut them into pieces, which we chip the wood. And you have, as a result, ramule chipped wood. This is a complete metamorphosis of the European compost pile. So it goes over the soil and protects the soil from the tropical African sun. And suddenly the soil turns to be living soil because it is protected not out of the clouds and of the climate situation, but out of agriculture managing. And our great friend Manfred Klett, he never stopped stressing that biodynamic agriculture includes parts which nature does not naturally, but which is a creative, artistic managing of the farmer. So he describes, for instance, the preparations. People could look now at our ART method, A-R-T method. You have our website, regenerativapom.art.br, and you will find several ways of doing this soil protection with this so beautiful material, which is ramule chipped woods, and I have talked too much.
Thank you so much, Manfred. I just saw that Alan raised his hand, so to say. So maybe Alan, what were your ideas on this as well?
Not to interrupt, but just to kind of add, one thing that I love is the idea of the mix of the field and forest and water, and in the agriculture course, it said that you need to have these places, and less do you have those places in the temperate climates? In fact, just 100 years ago, and this is an interesting thing about our forest as well as just any of them around here, basically Pennsylvania was clear cut. I mean, they had used it for timber. They had used it to fire forges that made iron. Some of this was for, Civil War. Some of it was for building, things like that. So you really didn't have these places, and people were just doing the agriculture, like very plain, clear, not holistic, very reductionist in nature. But I think you do start to see a little more forest growth here next to land that is being used either for grazing or for annual agriculture. And I wanted to mention that just as Manfred was saying that, to have the trees, use the trees as that sort of cover and as that friend, We're doing that also with grazing, which is of course called silvopasture, that we have Icelandic sheep here. And I think animals are always a very important part of the whole of the farm organism, and just figuring out how to do that and at what level. But we have forests that we are turning more into pasture, not completely, but making space for pasture in between the trees. And then we have fields that we are making more into forest. So we're trying to kind of integrate those two spaces. And, it really is a beautiful thing to combine those two things, not just for annual, but also for the grazing of animals. And it has just been an absolutely beautiful experience watching the sheep, and even cows will do this, will eat the locust tree, will eat the multiflora, maybe they won't eat the multiflora rose, the spiky, kind of things. But just to give that variety, I think, to an animal as well, offers that, really gets that biodiversity going and that organism sort of singing together. So I just kind of felt inspired to kind of add that, is that, we've been talking a lot about the growing of crops, but I think also the grazing of animals is something that can benefit from trees.
True. I mean, I may add here some European practice as well, because the region where I come from, it's quite a dry region, so it has about 400 millimeters annual precipitation, and the sand is bare. The soil, not the sand is, but the soil is bare sand. So it's basically really a desert-like environment, and the traditional agriculture farms had in the middle of the fields some tree islands where you had a hole which could fill up with water when it was raining, and then during the year the trees soaked up the water and kind of spread it also on the agriculture field. So I think that was one very clever form of let's say agroforestry kind of fish system, and it just got lost, and you will see that the agriculture fields are much more worse off than with those trees and with the fallows. So I really like the idea of the both of you to see trees as fellow companies, and to not just say that they're difficult to handle or something like this. Sometimes partners are also difficult to handle. So so that's a very good point. And I'm just looking at the time now, because time flies really fast with the two of you. So at the end of the podcast, I'm always asking my guests for their 3 main reasons why they keep up the work in biodynamics, or why they still get connected with anthroposophy and biodynamics. And maybe, Manfred, you could start with your 3 main reasons shortly why you love biodynamics.
Well, I really love it, and I love anthroposophy, because for me this spirituality is a great well. I could not even imagine to have done my work until today without being in connection with this well, and on the other hand, making my contribution to this great realm of spirituality, which is anthroposophy. And tropics for me are a sphere which today have, that's the second reason, has a great contribution to do for the rest of the world. Tropics were looked upon pitiful as the third world. And today tropics are for me the laboratory where you can do today actually all the things you will have to do in other biomes, in other climatic situations, to save crops. So tropics have evolved silently into nature systems, and I hope people would love to learn with them. For instance, all that Darwinism brought us of competition into our economic life of humanity could be turned into collaboration, into cooperation, into a very, very inclusive way of making economics if we learn how Darwin doesn't explain nothing inside the tropical. You cannot apply the Darwin theory to the Amazonian basin. It doesn't work. You need Lynn Margulis. And this, for me, is a scientific mainstream. And I hope we will have the chance to explain about these things with examples, practical examples. And the third line that makes me keep on doing a tropical anthroposophical agriculture or art is that I would like to help people to save their crops, because the world is changing and people are turning unsecure in their feelings. They feel this is no more the world I learned to work in. Everything is different. Now I heard a couple of months ago near Berlin was burning a big wood because it was dry. And then I went to the agriculture Tagung in Dornach in February. And I sat down with a near friend of me, Kes Valenga. And Kes was talking about what he is doing in his woods. And it was so clear that I could help him a lot to find a new way for his wood, because I know what is a drought since I was born. And European people, they have to learn. So the third reason I keep on researching is the will to help where it is necessary to save crops.
Well, thank you, Manfred. This really touches my
emergency agriculture, we can call it, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. That really touches my heart, because the region you and the fire you were just referring is really close next to my mom's place. So, so I know it was a horrible fire, and you're definitely right. There's so many things to be done in this region. So thanks very much for this. And Alan, so what are your top three, so to say, for biodynamic farming?
Yeah, maybe. Certainly very similar to Manfred's, but I like lists, so I made the list as you asked three questions, and the first is the earth needs it. That's why it's so clear, and not just biodynamics, but I think spiritual science. I think the earth needs people to see. The earth needs people to see the whole. And the second reason is that people need it, and not just biodynamics, but they need an awareness of what is going on around them. And I think they also need the social opportunities that biodynamics bring, including celebration of the festivals, stirring of preparations, just even being at these places that are full of life, and full of love. So we really need that, especially after, the last 2 or 3 years. I think this is who would have thought farming was an opportunity to heal that, and I really believe that it is with biodynamic agriculture. And the third reason to continue for me is that I absolutely love it. It's the least important and the most selfish reason, but it brings me great joy to bring life and the fullness of life that is the absolutely whole macrocosm, just everything. So it's been a very important part of my life since beginning that journey, and so I love it.
Wow, thank you so much, Alan. And yeah, I think it's okay to have selfish reasons to do something like this, but you're also absolutely right that it's an opportunity for others to get back into connecting with nature and rhythms and communicating with nature again in a way. And for me, this podcast episode was really special, not just because the two of you are great people, but also because agroforestry and biodynamics is at the moment not so much on the picture, but it's coming up more and more. And I just wanted to give the opportunity for people who would like to join this field to have a first impression from somebody like you, Alan, who just started recently, but is also very engaged in this, and Manfred, who has a vast experience in doing this already. So thanks again, the two of you, and I hope this podcast episode is an opener for further discussion and visiting. And I will link your websites for the people that are interested in case they want to contact you. And a warm thank you from my side.
Thank you, Len. Thank you, Manfred.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye.